Talking of wine, halloo, here are more of them coming upstairs. There, there, don't trouble yourselves. You have all got capital characters, and you shall all stop here along with me. What was I saying just now? Something about wine, so it was. I'll tell you what, Mr. Butler, it isn't every day that a new master comes to Thorpe Ambrose, and it's my wish that we should all start together on the best possible terms. Let the servants have a grand jollification downstairs to celebrate my arrival, and give them what they like to drink my health in. It's a poor heart, Mrs. Gripper, that never rejoices, isn't it? No, I won't look at the cellar now. I want to go out and get a breath of fresh air before breakfast. Where's Richard? I say, have I got a garden here? Which side of the house is it? That side, eh? You needn't show me round. I'll go alone, Richard, and lose myself, if I can, in my own property. With those words, Allan descended the terrace steps in front of the house, whistling cheerfully. He had met the serious responsibility of settling his domestic establishment to his own entire satisfaction. People talk of the difficulty of managing their servants, thought Allan. What on earth do they mean? I don't see any difficulty at all. He opened an ornamental gate leading out of the drive at the side of the house, and following the footman's directions, entered the shrubbery that sheltered the Thorpe Ambrose gardens. Nice shady sort of place for a cigar, said Allan, as he sauntered along with his hands in his pockets. I wish I could beat it into my head that it really belongs to me. The shrubbery opened on the broad expanse of a flower garden, flooded bright in its summer glory by the light of the morning sun. On one side an archway broken through a wall led into the fruit garden. On the other, a terrace of turf led to ground on a lower level, laid down as an Italian garden. Wandering past the fountains and statues, Allan reached another shrubbery, winding its way apparently to some remote part of the grounds. Thus far, not a human creature had been visible or audible anywhere, but as he approached the end of the second shrubbery, it struck him that he heard something on the other side of the foliage. He stopped and listened. There were two voices speaking distinctly, an old voice that sounded very obstinate, and a young voice that sounded very angry. "It's no use, miss," said the old voice. "I mustn't allow it, and I won't allow it. What would Mr. Armadale say?" "If Mr. Armadale is the gentleman I take him for, you old brute," replied the young voice, "he would say, 'Come into my garden, Miss Milroy, as often as you like, and take as many nosegays as you please.'" Allan's bright blue eyes twinkled mischievously. Inspired by a sudden idea, he stole softly to the end of the shrubbery, darted round the corner of it, and vaulting over a low ring fence, found himself in a trim little paddock, crossed by a gravel walk. At a short distance down the wall stood a young lady with her back toward him, trying to force her way past an impenetrable old man with a rake in his hand, who stood obstinately in front of her, shaking his head. "Come into my garden, Miss Milroy, as often as you like, and take as many nosegays as you please," cried Allan, remorselessly repeating her own words. The young lady turned round with a scream. Her muslin dress, which she was holding up in front, dropped from her hand, and a prodigious lapful of flowers rolled out on the gravel walk. Before another word could be said, the impenetrable old man stepped forward with the utmost composure, and entered on the question of his own personal interests, as if nothing whatever had happened, and nobody was present but his new master and himself. "I bid you humbly welcome to Thorpe Ambrose, sir," said this ancient of the gardens. "My name is Abraham Sage. I have been employed in the grounds for more than 40 years, and I hope you'll be pleased to continue me in my place." So, with the vision inexorably limited to the horizon of his own prospects, spoke the gardener, and spoke in vain. Allan was down on his knees on the gravel walk, collecting the fallen flowers, and forming his first impressions of Miss Milroy from the feet upward. She was pretty, she was not pretty; she charmed, she disappointed, she charmed again. Tried by recognized line and rule, she was too short and too well developed for her age, and yet few men's eyes could have wished her figure other than it was. Her hands were so prettily plump and dimpled that it was hard to see how red they were with the blessed exuberance of youth and health. Her feet apologized gracefully for her old and ill-fitting shoes, and her shoulders made ample amends for the misdemeanor in muslin which covered them in the shape of a dress. Her dark gray eyes were lovely in their clear softness of color, in their spirit, tenderness, and sweet good humor of expression, and her hair, where a shabby old garden hat allowed it to be seen, was of just that lighter shade of brown which gave value by contrast to the darker beauty of her eyes. But these attractions passed, the little attendant blemishes and imperfections of this self-contradictory girl began again. Her nose was too short, her mouth was too large, her face was too round and too rosy. The dreadful justice of photography would have had no mercy on her, and the sculptors of classical Greece would have bowed her regretfully out of their studios. Admitting all this, and more, the girdle round Miss Milroy's waist was the girdle of Venus nevertheless, and the pass-key that opens the general heart was the key she carried, if ever a girl possessed it yet. Before Allan had picked up his second handful of flowers, Allan was in love with her. "Don't, pray don't, Mr. Armadale," she said, receiving the flowers under protest, as Allan vigorously showered them back into the lap of her dress. "I'm so ashamed! I didn't mean to invite myself in that bold way into your garden. My tongue ran away with me. It did, indeed. What can I say to excuse myself? Oh, Mr. Armadale, what must you think of me?" Allan suddenly saw his way to a compliment, and tossed it up to her forthwith with the third handful of flowers. "I can tell you what I think, Miss Milroy," he said, in his blunt, boyish way. "I think the luckiest walk I ever took in my life was the walk this morning that brought me here." He looked eager and handsome. He was not addressing a woman worn out with admiration, but a girl just beginning a woman's life, and it did him no harm at any rate to speak in the character of master of Thorpe Ambrose. The penitential expression on Miss Milroy's face gently melted away. She looked down, demure and smiling, at the flowers in her lap. "I deserve a good scolding," she said. "I don't deserve compliments, Mr. Armadale, least of all from you." "Oh, yes, you do!" cried the headlong Allan, getting briskly on his legs. "Besides, it isn't a compliment, it's true. You're the prettiest— I beg your pardon, Miss Milroy, my tongue ran away with me that time." Among the heavy burdens that are laid on female human nature, perhaps